Now let's finish up the seat. So now that we've got these connected, if we need to do any modifications here, go ahead and always just come in and select those vertices and just move those over. So let's say I want to take the top points right along here of this spline cage, and I'll just grab all of these, and let's say that I just want to move these over just a little bit. Okay, so we get something like that. Let's say I now want to come in and grab these guys. Okay, and just move these over just a little. Okay, so go ahead and just move these in just a little bit. Okay, and you can just modify the shape of what you've got. And we've got the cage completed. You've got everything connected the way that you want. Again, you can go in and just add a surface modifier to this. We can flip our normals. We can change the steps to kind of preview that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 0 so that when we convert that, everything will be good. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and collapse stack. Say yes. Turns into an editable patch, which I'll then turn into an editable poly. Okay. Now we can add any edges that we need to add to kind of tighten things up a little bit. So I want some of these edges to be a little bit tighter. So I can come in and add edges, and I also wanted to refine this a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and take this border right here. Okay. And I'm just going to go to scale, hold down shift, and just pull that in a little bit. Now go to translate, move, and hold down shift, and I'll just push this in, and this gives you a nice way to kind of just extrude this geometry in. Hold down shift and pull it in again, and then back to scale, and that'll create a nice little hole there for when we smooth that. I'll have a nice little hole there. Alright, and so you can now, if you wanted to add edges along here, you could do that. If you wanted to maybe take this edge ring and just connect an edge right across here to kind of tighten up that edge, you could do that. And you can always go back and check, smooth that. You can see how that kind of tightens up that edge a little. Okay, and then maybe you want to come in and tighten up these edges in here. Okay, so maybe we could take this particular edge, select that ring, or that loop rather, and then chamfer that with a fairly low amount. And that'll give you a little bit more hardness than what you had before. Okay. You might want a little bit more hardness in there. You could add another edge loop in there as well. And then you could also just use your edit geometry cut to come in on these edges that don't really follow a kind of a quad path, and just add that along whatever particular edge you want to be a little bit harder. So in this case it would be that edge right in there as this comes off here. Okay, and then you toggle that, and you have a little bit more of an edge there. And again, you can go down to your subdivision surface and just up that smoothness on that. So you can see how you're starting to get a little bit of those edges in there. So let's go ahead and finish that out. Okay, let me go back and kind of draw this in. Now as we turn this corner, come in here and draw that along in this direction, okay, which will help us get the sharpness on this edge here. Okay, and then come around in this way. Okay, and we want to cut across here, so we'll just go ahead and cut across. You can see where that leaves that little triangle there. So go ahead and complete that, and then I can take those two vertices here, and you can see where that triangle has been created. If you didn't want that triangle there, you could go ahead and just cut that off at that point. Otherwise, you can leave that there. So we've got that geometry coming up and over, and we can go ahead and continue that up across this line and just cut it off as it gets to the back here. And all the way back here. And over to the side. Okay, so then you end up with something like that. You get just a little indication. The edges aren't super hard, but you just get a little bit more of an indication of those harder edges. Gives it a little bit more shape. And when you're done with that, okay, we can add our symmetry to this to get that other side over there. And we don't want to do that until we have all the detail that we want to add. Okay, just check it to make sure that nothing's kind of welded together that shouldn't be. Okay, go ahead and collapse that and then convert to nettable poly if it happens to go to a mesh. And now what we can do is, you can see that this is pretty narrow. So what we want to do is kind of shape this a little bit more. So let's go ahead and add another modifier, and let's add a freeform deformer. Okay, so you're gonna find these under the FFD, and if you're familiar with some other packages, you may know these as a lattice. But we'll go ahead and use one of these. So this is the resolutions that come here. You can also, if you want to modify and give it a very specific amount, you can go ahead and add your own. I'll just use 4x4x4. Now selecting this, we can go in here to the control points. Okay, now we're selecting control points rather than points on the mesh, and we can go ahead and widen this out, let's say. Okay, if we want to kind of make this seat a bit wider, okay, maybe fill it out a little bit more. We can go ahead and do some shaping with this lattice. So this is allowing us to take a fairly high-res mesh and modify it using a very low-res cage to affect the points. Okay, so you end up with kind of something like that. And you probably want to do it for the tank as well and kind of narrow it in here at the base. Okay. All right. So if we want to do it with the tank as well, we can kind of grab all of these and go ahead and add our modifier. Now you'll notice I've got it's basically smoothed out. So what I want to do is take off the NURBS preview here, and then go ahead and add our deformer back on. Back up here. Okay, I'll take the control points, and we can just kind of narrow it in at this point. And this whole thing may be a bit too wide, so we could come in and just kind of narrow it down a bit so it matches up a little bit better with our frame. Okay. And then you can always go in and collapse that stack when you're done. Okay, to get to kind of bake that deformer onto your geometry. All right. So that's how we can kind of finish up our seat and just go in and shape it. If it happens to be our splines weren't shaped appropriately, we can always go in with the deformer and shape it after the fact. All right. So let's go ahead now. We've kind of got our seat built out. You could also come in and just build that with some traditional polygon techniques, but using splines sometimes is a little bit easier to block some of the shapes in. But next, let's go ahead and start working on the wheel of our motorcycle. Then we'll move on to the tires and the brakes and things like that. So let's go ahead and start doing that in the next lesson.